And before we get started, I'm going to have D. Goodwin come and introduce those who are on the stage. D.
First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone here. I'd like to announce each individual that is sitting here on the stage. And we have Ellen Hyatt from Severn Bank. We have Adrian Jones, Speaker of the House. Sorry. We have Mayor Gavin Buckley. We have Maria Hyacinth. We have Summerlee Winters Geimer. We have Andrea Chambly. We have our guest speaker, David Simon. We have Laura Lippman. We have Phil Davis. Please stand. We have County Executive Stuart Pittman. We have Vice Admiral Sean Buck from the U.S. Naval Academy. We have Rick Hutzel, the former editor of the Council. We have Darrell Jones, Esquire. He is a member of the Caucus of African American Leaders. And we have Trith Alatsas from the Baltimore Sun Media Group. And I'm D. Goodwin.
Thank you, D. Let me get some housekeeping chores out of the way. Number one, if you get overheated, there is the bus, the cooling bus. Please feel free to visit that. It's to my left. Water will be being distributed as we go forward with this particular program. And we have a number of dignitaries that's in the audience that will be introduced as we go throughout the program, the dignitaries that have joined us. Let me just say 3 years ago there was this sentence that was said that was a lie then and it's a lie now. That sentence was, the press is the enemies of the people. Nothing could be further from the truth. We thank everyone who took the time to join us today to help memorize the 5 slain journalists, employees of the Capital newspaper, who lost their lives exactly 3 years ago today. Gerald, Robert, John, Rebecca, and Wendy. These people were our family, our co-workers, and our friends and vital members of our community. Each played a vital roles in our lives as volunteers, as columnists, editors, journalists, and staff and sales assistants. We refer to them as guardians of the First Amendment. They put their lives on the line for the freedom of speech. The 5 white columns that you see standing in front surrounding the memorial represents the 5 guardians. We all know that the journalism is essential. We need journalists to help us defend our free press and First Amendment. We thank the family and survivors and friends for being here. With the family of the members, with the families, please rise, as well as the survivors. And let's give them a round of applause. The families and the survivors. Let's give them a round of applause. We want to also take this moment to recognize Juanita Cage Lewis for first coming up with the idea to build a memorial in tribute to the slain journalist because of her association with Wendy Williams. She brought the idea to the Caucus of African American Leaders, who took it to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King Committee, and because our members had worked with Wendy as she reported on issues going on in the community, we voted unanimously to make Juanita's idea become a reality, to build a memorial for all of these individuals who gave so much to this community. Will Juanita Cage Lewis please stand? And let's give her a round of applause. Juanita Cage Lewis annually portrays Coretta Scott King in the annual Martin Luther King Jr. parade that takes place in Annapolis. I should also like to recognize Dee Goodwin. She was on board with the vote to build a memorial as well as from the very beginning. Dee is the type of person to work behind the scenes without expecting a lot of recognition. Well, for the last 3 years straight, Dee was focused on working to help raise the pertinent questions to ensure everything was on point. Dee is a great organizer. She likes to see things done with perfection. To your left is the story wall that she created. This story wall tells the story, and we hope when this breaks up, you take a moment and read the story wall, which shows each of the milestones to lead up to this day. Dee Goodwin, would you please stand so we can acknowledge you? Dee's 97-year-old mother is with us, and I want to take a moment and have us acknowledge her mother, Mrs. Bessie Knight. Let's give her a round of applause. These issues are often complicated and deal with a lot of legal work, and we were able to have Daryl Jones to be able to represent the Martin Luther King Jr. Committee as we put together the plan and the necessary documents to make this a reality. Daryl is taking on a new role as chair of a coalition, a national coalition that's focusing on preserving the right to vote. Daryl Jones has been very active working with this national organization to ensure that the rights of all citizens are protected, the voting rights of all citizens are protected. Daryl, would you please take a stand? Would you please stand up? And I want the county executive and the mayor to know that this could not have been possible without the work of many members of their staff. The men and women who worked on this project did an incredible job. So I'm going to ask all of the employees who worked on this job, whether you're with the county or the city, to please stand. Please stand. Let's acknowledge the great work they did. But all committee members, please stand. Again, they did a magnificent job. I want to also acknowledge the project design. Renee had given us an idea when we met with the Baltimore Sun. We were looking at how could we define this particular memorial. When she actually came with the idea of calling it the guardians of the First Amendment. And that really resonated with us. We put out early in the process, we put out a request for a design. So we got a lot of different ideas coming in. But it seemed to us that the guardians of the First Amendment captured the spirit of what we wanted to memorialize. The person who came up with this scheme, or with this particular design, I should say, is Jay Graham and Kelly Fleming. Would you please stand? And we have representatives from the project construction Old Town Landscape Architect. Would they please stand? Samantha did an excellent job. Let's give them a round of applause. I want to also acknowledge the Anne Arundel County Chamber of Commerce, who turned out today and showed their support, the Anne Arundel County NAACP, Caucus of African American Leaders, and Bishop Antonio Palmer. Would you please stand? He's with the United Black Clergy. He has been an amazing leader in this community. There he is, in the back, in the shade, the bishop. Also, I would like to acknowledge the Reverend Ricky Nelson Jones, who's with the NAACP. Reverend Jones, would you stand? This next group is all groups of people, and there's a reason for this. Would all journalists or previous journalists please stand? All journalists or previous journalists, please stand. I want everybody to acknowledge them. I am so grateful to this free press. I know the power of a free press. I've had the pleasure and the privilege to travel around the world. And I can tell you, this First Amendment, this right to publish, the right to speak, the right to petition, is essential. Would all law enforcement officials please stand? All law enforcement officials please stand. And Dee reminded me to remind Tony Spencer to stand. Tony Spencer's going to be singing a song for us. Tony, would you stand? Let's acknowledge Tony Spencer. On that terrible day 3 years ago, the reason I asked law enforcement officials to stand, because the first responders did a marvelous job. They responded and perhaps saved many lives because how quickly they responded. Would any first responder that was there that day, who's with us today, please stand. I want to acknowledge those persons especially. These are the first responders. Chief Kevin Simmons, Chief O'Malley, 3 years ago, a group of us was meeting with the next speaker. We were in a group. It was a regular meeting. It's a quarterly meeting we was having with him. We were dealing with issues that impact on our community here in the city of Annapolis. And suddenly, in the room came an aide. She whispered in his ear something and then beckoned him to leave the meeting immediately. He left the meeting, came back. You could tell something had happened. The expression on his face said it all. And he walked forward and he made the point that we had to end the meeting. Someone whispered there had been a shooting. As we left, many of us thought the shooting they were referring to was at the state capitol. And so we left assuming that's where the shooting was. Some went toward the State House to see what was going on. It was only later that we learned that it was not the State House, it was not the state capitol, it was the Capitol newspaper. One of the persons that have made this day possible, one of the persons who have helped to make this event possible, was our next speaker. Please join me in welcoming to the podium, Mayor Gavin Buckley.
First of all, it takes a team to pull this sort of stuff off, so I just want to acknowledge the Annapolis City Council. If you guys could please stand up and so good morning and welcome. I want to thank you all for being here today on this most solemn of anniversaries. I want to thank and acknowledge the family and friends and all of you for being here. I thank you for taking time to be together in the midst of the tumult we've all been through in the past year with the pandemic. Today, it feels right to be together in remembrance of our loss and in continuing a shared grief. We are gathered to dedicate this memorial, which I hope you will return to and use as a place of reflection. Guardians of the First Amendment, Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyson, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters. These are the guardians of the Annapolis community of journalism, and these are the members that we have lost. I hope you'll visit this site to reflect on their memory and their legacy, but I also think about the meaning of the First Amendment, which was not only under assault on June 28th, 2018 at the Capital Gazette newsroom, but which has faced continuing threats from the former President of the United States, corporations who seek to undermine the resources of a functioning local journalism, and threats that come from beyond our borders. These are all dangerous intrusions that undermine the very tenet of democracy. This memorial is not a bulwark against these threats. That bulwark is us. It is us as voters, as supporters, and consumers of local newspapers. The freedom we as Americans hold dear as foundational rights have always been something we have had to fight for. This memorial is a reminder for us to keep up that fight. On your program, the flowers you see at the top are thistles. Thistles are one of the two flowers you see on the Annapolis city seal, the other being a rose. Thistles were selected for this program because of what they symbolize. This thistle represents overcoming adversity and difficult situations. It is a symbol of resilience. In Celtic tradition, it also represents the following traits: devotion, bravery, determination, and strength. When I think of the 5 journalists we lost, we can't help but be drawn to their devotion to their craft. As staff and journalists of the hometown newspaper, these were the 5 individuals who truly cared about their community. Through all of the cuts and setbacks the paper had suffered up to 2018, they were devoted to the readers and to sharing information with and about this community. Bravery. I don't have to tell you, because we all know the story of their bravery, the bravery of those we lost, but the continuing bravery of survivors. We can't ever know how difficult it is for you, but please know you are surrounded by a community that loves and cares about you. We care about not only what you do as journalists, but as people who suffered a grievous loss. Determination. Former Capitol reporter and editor Chase Cook had the perfect quote on the day of the shooting. It demonstrated the determination of the staff to not be defined by tragedy. We are putting a damn paper out. They did. They haven't missed one since. It's my fervent hope that they will continue to put out a damn paper and that the new owners will support this effort. Theodore Roosevelt once said about determination, do what you can with what you have where you are. I know the remaining staff is determined to do just that. And finally, strength. We are here today because we are strong and we are a resilient community that has come together to lift up the survivors, the victims, their families, and local journalism. We have some people I want to thank for getting us here today. I want to thank the Caucus of African American Leaders, in particular Carl Snowden, for being a champion of this project. I know that Dee Goodwin of the Dr. Martin Luther King Committee had the idea. She deserves the credit for the initiative. So thank you, Dee. And Wendy Cage Letter, sorry, Juanita. Sorry. But without Carl to believe in this project and believe that it could get unveiled today, making us believe it too, it might not have happened. I want to thank Lisa Greco and Director Michael Johnson from our Department of Public Works, who forgot there was a pandemic and shepherded this project through in record time. I want to thank the county, the state, and the individual contributors for helping us deliver on an Annapolis memorial. This memorial, in such a prominent place in downtown Annapolis, will be here to remind us of those we lost, but also to encourage us to think about the foundational freedom that we as Americans hold dear. Without a free press, we can't have a functioning democracy. A free press holds politicians like me, and I know a few of you are out there, accountable. The American spirit is strong. The Annapolis community is strong. Let's use this memorial as a place to remind ourselves of that strength. Thank you.
Let me ask David Gerald to stand. David, would you stand and be acknowledged? David Gerald is the city manager, and again, his leadership helped make this happen. David, thank you so very much. I also want to acknowledge Susie Smith, who was part of the committee and worked on this. Susie, would you and Mitchell please stand? And before I introduce his boss, I want to acknowledge Vince Molden, who just was an incredible worker. Vince, please stand. Let's acknowledge Vince Molden. Our next speaker is someone who was a partner in making this happen. There's no question it would not have happened without him working with the mayor and others to make it possible. Leadership is about making things happen, delivering things. When it's all said and done, elections is about a referendum. What has people done? When American people vote, they always look to see what we have, can we get something better? 3 years ago, voters made that decision in Anne Arundel County, and he has delivered in making our county better. Please welcome to the podium the Honorable Stuart Pittman, County Executive.
Mind if I raise this? I'll just talk loud. All right. Can I start by recognizing the Anne Arundel County Council? Can you all stand, please? They fund our first responders. They fund our crisis intervention teams. They fund our gun violence intervention team in our health department, so thank you. So I thought a lot about what to say today. I needed to sort through some very strong opinions about the attack on our newspaper, about the loss of Gerald, Rob, John, Rebecca, Wendy, about this country's failure to confront its epidemic of gun violence, about the value of journalism as a profession, about the healthy impact of local journalism on local government, and about the means by which Alden Global Capital, our newspaper's brand new owner, grows the wealth of its investors. I put many of those thoughts into a letter, and I sent it to Alden's leaders. I hope that they would join us today, and I hope that they will visit this community soon. I hope that their stockholders hear our story and work with us to grow rather than shrink our newspaper. And if they don't, I hope that we can find a way to recreate what they take away from us. We need a damn newspaper. And like many of you, I get angry about these things. Anger can feed activism, good activism, and that is a path to progress. But to me, this memorial and this gathering are not about anger and activism. When I look at this structure and when I look at your faces, I know, and you know, that we need to heal. We must heal ourselves, and we must heal each other. We know that's what our 5 fallen heroes would have wanted, and we know that it's what we want. Trusted news source, I think it was National Public Radio, reported a few years back on a study that showed the power of gratitude, presented evidence that feeling and expressing gratitude improves health and wellness, can actually heal us. We are surrounded today by people who have earned our gratitude. So let's try it. Let's thank them not just with words, but with our hearts. We are grateful for Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacinth, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters for the work they did and the lives they led. And we are grateful for the ones who loved these 5 heroes and were loved by them, for putting one foot in front of the other and walking, for keeping them alive in your hearts, and for doing what you can to prevent the next killing. We are grateful to all of the 2018 candidates for public office who responded to the Capitol's call for answers to the question, what will you do to prevent the next mass shooting? the next killing. And to the Capitol staff for bravely asking that question. We are grateful to our brave police officers, our crisis intervention teams, our firefighters, our deputy sheriffs, our Office of Emergency Management, and everyone else who rushed to 888 Bestgate Road on June 28, 3 years ago, hoping to save lives and heal the wounded. We're grateful to Paul Gillespie. For the photographs that are displayed right now at the Michael E. Bush Library, images that speak more eloquently than any of us will today. We're grateful to the leaders and the members of the Chesapeake News Guild for bringing people together for bringing together the people who work so hard to produce our local papers and speaking truth to power, seeking no more than a livable wage and respect. We're grateful to Stuart Bainham and others for trying to transfer our Capital Gazette and our beloved partner, the Baltimore Sun, to nonprofit management. We're grateful to all the journalists who have served our community through their work at the Capitol. Thank you for your service. And this one's hard. We are so grateful for so many reasons to the man who became the heart of this newspaper and gave his heart to this newspaper and to this community. We're so grateful for Rick Hutzel. And we are grateful to all journalists everywhere who work so hard for so little to uncover truth and spread it across the land. Finally, we will forever be grateful, as will residents and visitors to this place for many generations, to the people who conceived of this memorial and made it happen, to Carl Snowden and the Caucus of African American Leaders for the vision and the coordination of the effort, to Governor Hogan and our District 30 delegation for the investment of state dollars, to Mayor Buckley and his team for providing the site and financial support, and to the taxpayers of Anne Arundel County for their generous investment. This memorial will help to heal us. It will inspire us. And we are grateful.
I want to thank the county executive. Let's give him another round of applause. And I want to acknowledge the elected official who put in legislation that, if enacted, will ensure our democracy as we know it is expanded and better. Please welcome, or please acknowledge, Congressman John Soybeans. Would you please stand and be recognized? HR 1 S1 will literally change this nation. Thank you, Congressman. Would all elected officials please stand? Would all elected officials please stand? I want you to see the diversity we have in America. Look at this. Look at our elected officials. I wanted them to stand because I wanted to be able to have you see something. In my lifetime, I've seen a lot occur in America and throughout the world. In my lifetime, I saw a man named Nelson Mandela walk out of a prison into the presidency. In my lifetime, I saw Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday become a national holiday when people thought it would not happen. In my time, I've seen much changes in America, but one of the great changes I've seen is women coming to power. I love the fact that women are coming to power. And these women symbolize so much. They've said men have messed it up. Let women change it, make it. And I've seen women do incredible things. Seeing a woman sit down and refuse to give up her seat changed America. Saw women do amazing things. That's why it's my great pleasure to be able to say, welcome to the podium, Madam Speaker of the Maryland House of Delegates, the Honorable Adrian Jones.
Good morning, everyone. I know that, and thank you for that kind introduction, Carl, and I know that he referenced all elected officials to get up, but I want all House and Senate members to stand, please. They do a yeoman's job for the people. It's my honor to be here to remember the 5 journalists from the Capitol who tragically lost their lives upholding one of our most fundamental rights as Americans, our right to free speech and a free press under the First Amendment. What happened at the Capitol 3 years ago was unthinkable in this state and in this country. It shook this tight-knit community to its core. Speaker Mike Bush, my predecessor, told me at the time how personally he felt attacked. As he said at the vigil at City Dock, they were husbands, wives, mothers, and fathers. They didn't come from someplace else. They were dedicated to our community. We did what Maryland does best in times of crisis. We came together, supported one another, and took action, and never forgot. Today in Maryland, we have landmark red flag legislation to try to prevent guns from being in the hands of those who could harm themselves or others. But we aren't done yet, and we cannot forget what their sacrifices means. The spirit of these brave journalists will live on through this memorial and in the State House press room, where we have also honored the memory of the Capitol and the journalists. It is a reminder that governments should be transparent, the public should know the truth, and journalists shouldn't be afraid to tell it. A free press holds all of us accountable. We will continue to push for stronger gun safety measures, and we will be unwavering in our commitment to protecting a free press. I want to thank the Board of Public Works, the County Executive, and Mayor for making this memorial possible, as well as your organization, Carl. Both, you head up many. I want to acknowledge the survivors of the shooting. We see you, and this community is here for you. I also want to applaud the Capitol and other members of the press corps for their continued dedication to freedom and democracy. Press on. Thank you. And I I do have to leave today. My staff had me in 3 different counties. This is my second. I'm headed to my third. But I'm asking you to press on, and thank you.
Let's give her another round of applause. We understand she has a very busy schedule, and we're grateful that she's able to join us. Let me ask members of the Martin Luther King Jr. Committee to stand, which includes which includes also the president of the Anne Arundel County NAACP, Jackie Alsop. Would the members of the Martin Luther King Jr. Committee please stand? Please remain standing as I ask the members of the Caucus of African American Leaders to please just stand as well. All the caucus members, please stand as well. We thank you for your contributions and helping to make this happen. I want to now turn to our next speaker on the program, who's going to bring us the occasion. Laura Lippman is a noted journalist in her own right, but today she's acting as a speaker to put in perspective, why are we here? What is this occasion about? Please join me in welcome to the podium, Laura Lippman.
Thank you. I think the main reason I'm here today is because I had the great good fortune to sit 3 feet away from Rob Hyacinth for many happy years at the Baltimore Sun Features Department. I left my life as a reporter 20 years ago this November, but I hope you will indulge me if I use the first person plural in my remarks today, because one never really stops being a journalist. When I was a reporter, I thought the funniest thing people could say was, "You only want to sell newspapers." For one thing, it showed a complete misunderstanding of the business model at the time, which centered on home delivery, and the newsstand price of a paper contributed far less to the bottom line than advertising in those days. Most of all, this accusatory comment amused me because you have never met a group of people less interested in making money for themselves or their corporate owners than the people who wanted to work in newsrooms. Most of us couldn't even add and subtract. But the very fact that we had chosen journalism as a professional path belied our lack of interest in personal enrichment. There were more lucrative fields open to us if that's what we cared about. Instead, we wanted what H.L. Mencken once called the life of kings, and queens, if I may be permitted to edit the sage of Baltimore. We could follow the money in service to our communities because we were not, in fact, interested in following the money for ourselves. W.H. Auden, in his tribute to W.B. Yeats, described poetry as a place where executives would never want to tamper. It survives, he wrote, in the valley of its making, flows on south from ranches of isolation in the busy Greece, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth. That sounds a lot like journalism to me, except for the part where Auden says poetry makes nothing happen. Journalism makes everything happen. Journalism has changed history. When will people learn to value local journalism is a question we hear so often. And my answer has been, well, one day some people are going to wake up and find out there's a strip club across the street from their house, and it went up unnoticed because there wasn't a reporter to cover the zoning board. And it is a particularly bitter irony that hedge fund capitalists, the very executives who would never want to tamper in the actual pursuit of news, only in shaping it and molding it for their own selfish interest, now feast on the bones of those who have always been uninterested in profit for themselves. But that's a topic for another day. In the past 2 decades, we have learned the painful truth that newspapers can die. On June 28, 2018, the families and friends of the 5 journalists we have gathered here today to honor had to endure the pain of seeing the lives of their loved ones cut short in an act of gun violence that was inextricably tied to their professional lives and the harsh rhetoric of our times. But there is something that cannot be stopped, not by those armed against us, nor through those who would misuse the Department of Justice, and that is the collective power and energy of a newsroom, this almost unfathomable passion to chronicle the times in which we live, and the camaraderie that results among those who choose to do it. That cannot be vanquished. Even now, as newspapers are stripped for their parts, as jobs with benefits become increasingly rare, there are so many young people, and not so young people, who feel the same sense of purpose that brought Rob Hyacin, Gerald Fishman, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters to the Capitol Gazette. We have gathered here today for a specific memorial, but we can, going forward, pay tribute to their sacrifice every day by pledging to reward those willing to devote their very lives, their actual lives as it turns out, so we might better understand the times and places in which we live. Newspapers can be killed. People can be killed. What cannot be killed are the legacies of the 5 journalists we honor today and the indomitable spirit of those who continue to do this essential work. Thank you.
Let's give it another round of applause. Please look at your program. We're about to hear from the family members of remembrance. But before doing that, I want us to pause for 60 seconds and remember the 5 individuals who passed. Just 60 seconds. The next voice you'll be hearing is those of the family members. Please welcome them with a round of applause.
Hello, I'm Andrea Chambly. I'm John McNamara's widow. Anniversaries are supposed to be happy occasions, so welcome to our tragiversary. The 3 of us are here together because Maria and I wanted to stand in solidarity with Summer as she reads the poem she's selected, and to show that we stand in solidarity, and because Maria and I are journalists in the past and always at heart. I want to sign up again after that speech. I met John in journalism school. The First Amendment includes not only freedom of the press, but it's inextricably intertwined with the freedom of speech, equally precious. During the past 3 years, our rights to free speech have been threatened by extremists who want to muzzle us. They demand the right to carry guns without permits, without training, without background checks, because they say they want to protect me. When I turn down their vigilantism, they get pretty upset. They seem ready to murder me too. They gather on social media to talk about how they'll get me to be quiet. Well, I'm here to say I won't be silent. I'm here. With my voice, I will speak for John. I will speak for the families who aren't here because they can't talk about this without choking on their own words. Their freedom of speech has been taken away from them. We are here to speak for them. We are here to mourn and to remember, to honor the lives of those who have been cruelly taken away from us. We're dedicated to preventing this from never happening again to any newspaper, to any family, to anyone. I've spent the last 3 years fighting for change, urging legislators to pass a bill that requires background checks for all firearms in Maryland, a bill that was vetoed. I still have hope that our leaders, including our governor, will use the powers we give them to make changes to prevent the impact of this violence. He's had 3 years to ask us how we're doing. I don't see him here today. They call it senseless, they call it accidental, but it makes perfect sense because the gun is right there, like Sir Edmund Hillary said about Mount Everest, because it's there. And there's nothing accidental about these foreseeable, preventable acts of violence. We demand our leaders use their positions to make real, meaningful change that will save lives. But freedom of the press isn't just a responsibility of governments. It's a responsibility of all of our institutions, our industries, our investors, and individuals. In addition to the First Amendment, and particularly in addition to the Second Amendment, we are here because the Constitution commands us to do everything we can as we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure our domestic tranquility, provide for our common defense, promote our general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and for our posterity. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. We're all here because we have no choice but to press on. 3 years ago, in what would be the last discussion I would ever have with my mom, she wore a black and white striped dress and a red sweater, and she twirled in front of me and asked if I got it. I did not. And she said, I'm black and white and red all over. And that summed up what being a journalist meant to her. She loved every part of her job. She didn't do it for the money, but she did it for her community, and she did it for us, for me, my siblings. And now we are here with you, and I greatly appreciate the support from our community in these trying times for our family. Now it seems like black and white and red all over is like a mean joke to a newspaper, so stained in blood. But yet we press on. And for that, I would like to read a poem. It is entitled Freedom of the Press by Michael Points. If we were tomorrow's headline, would we be missing lovers, reported as lost without a trace? Or simply declared guilty by the court of hearts and souls, traitors to the quest of love? Have our stories to each other simply become yesterday's news? Like day-old donuts, cheaper by the dozen. There was a time, my love, when we planned our very lives on paper napkins. Dreams were all that we could afford. The promise of fame and fortune were gossip. Every sunrise, a fresh new edition. Thank you, and press on.
Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm Maria Hyacinth. The last things my husband and I talked about were via email, midday, June the 28th. I decided, I want a birthday cake after all. Today is my birthday, an unfortunate day, I'll say. But I'm here not to talk about my birthday, but to talk about gratitude. Thank you for bringing that up. First, again, thank you, all of you, for being here. Thank you to every human who had anything to do with propping us up and keeping that paper alive all this time. And most sincere gratitude for all of you engineers and artists and fundraisers and donors and staff and leaders who have made this exquisite memorial. It is perfect. And I think so in part because it pays tribute not to the heinous act of June 28th, but to the losses of those we loved, and to the triumph of those strong writers and editors who rallied and got that damn paper out. And it's also perfect because of its honor of the First Amendment, the basic principle journalism stands on. But I want to detour just a bit and talk about location. You guys picked the best location. It's one Rob Hyacinth would have chosen himself if that's something he were asked to do, and I'll tell you why. He's an Aquarian, and he loved the water, and it's right over there, so thanks for that. A former boat owner at one point had one up the road in Eastport, and he loved those pocket parks. Right over there is where he and I would board the Woodwind schooner, anniversary date, take you out to the bay, to the long back, yeah. And fun fact, a novel he tried to publish was called Compromise Street. So there's that. And I must also say, we did get one of Rob's novels published after what happened, and sure enough, that Alex Haley statue shows up, the one up the road in Ego Alley. It's a comic scene. Spoiler alert: an ice cream cone lands in his crotch. It's funny if you know. Anyway, Rob Hyacinth loved this community. I so wish he can be here. He cannot. Let me tell you, your actions, your support make me feel compelled to say, I love you too. Thank you so very much.
Let's give them another round of applause. What I'd like to, before bringing up the next speaker, is to ask the Board of Education, in particular, something to do. 100 years from now, most of us will not be here. What our children learn from this event is so important. This particular location also happens to be next to an elementary school. And I'm simply amazed by the number of people who matriculate through high school into college, some earning a PhD, who never really take the time to understand what the First Amendment is and why it is so important. You stop people on the corner in a grocery store and ask, what is the First Amendment? We now have an opportunity here in Annapolis, and I would hope that Anne Arundel County Public Schools will make it a point to bring every student, some 80,000 plus, to this site, to visit, to remember, to understand why we pause to honor these 5 journalists. It's so important that our young people learn the lessons of history. I'm amazed by how many people don't know history. When I mention the name Madison, Washington, people think I'm talking about James Madison or George Washington, and I'm not. I'm talking about a man who was as skilled in history that if people really knew who Madison Washington was, those of you who've got your phone, I know we'll Google the name, and you'll discover that he was a man that freed a lot of people. And the majority of Americans have no idea who he was or why he's important. Those who survived terrible incidents get to chronicle them. They're the ones who get to leave for the rest of us who've never experienced it, what it means. Our next speaker has the dubious distinction of being a person that was on hand on that day. And what makes his reporting so remarkable? He was tweeting during the occasion. And Americans and Marylanders and Annapolitans could follow in real time what was happening. Please join me in bringing to the podium one of the survivors, Phil Davis.
Thank you. Thanks again. I hope that you can bear with me. Giving a speech in front of a bunch of people on a black stage as it hits noon is one of my personal nightmares, so I'm sorry. Sorry if I'm melting in front of literally everyone. But first, I want to thank the people, all of the people, who contributed to this memorial and today's event, from the Caucus of African American Leaders to the City of Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, and the state of Maryland. It's truly humbling to see the work that you and others have put in toward dedicating this memorial to that fateful day. Roughly 3 years ago, I stood over there at Annapolis City Dock with no prepared speech, as hundreds of people gathered and looked for answers on how we could heal as a community. I said what I could. Wendy, Rob, Gerald, John, and Rebecca were all good people. It was something that shouldn't have needed to be repeated, but something of that magnitude can shake a community to its core. So I wanted to make sure that their families got the support that they needed in the immediate aftermath, and that there was no question as to why they deserved it. Now, 3 years later, this heat feels all too familiar, but still just as hot. It's hard to avoid all that surrounded the Capitol in the year since the shooting, as time and corporate interest did not stand still after the tragedy. But as I was writing this speech, trying to balance everything that's happened since June 28, 2018, I was stricken by the name of the memorial itself, the Guardians of the First Amendment. Certainly in the annals of history, I want Wendy, Rob, Gerald, Rebecca, and John to be remembered with words like guardians. It will give their names weight, the weight they deserve, especially as people generations from now will learn about who they are, perhaps from the first time as they walk by this memorial. But I also knew these 5 as people, the good people I spoke about only 3 years ago, a few days after the shooting. I knew Rob as a passionate editor whose energy was infectious and spread to so many of the young reporters that worked underneath him in his editorial umbrella. Someone who encouraged me personally to focus on the people behind the stories and take risks creatively so that we could tell stories that would stick with people long after they put the newspaper down that day. I knew Wendy as someone who was at the center of every conversation, offering unique insight into Annapolis that helped remove the mystique of this historic place and painted it as the series of neighborhoods and neighbors it truly is. I knew Gerald as the stoic yet thorough editor who had worked with for countless weekends and had such a command of language. Many times we'd edit the day's paper together by printing out the pages beforehand and reviewing them, all the while, he would still compliment me on my article about Muhammad Ali's unique ties to a former Capitol reporter in the wake of Ali's death. I knew John as someone whose passion for sports was infectious, as someone coming from New Jersey who had really no clue about the area's basketball history. There were times when I felt like John was trying to take me to some of the most historic spots of Prince George's County and elsewhere in the DC metro region on the backs of his words alone. I knew Rebecca as someone who was newer to the team, who had already started to show an interest in being part of that collaboration of being a newspaper. I remember one time in particular when I had written a story out of circuit court, and she wanted to share some insider information that she had about the defendant. I was curious to learn about more about the case as it progressed. She knew she could contribute, and it always felt good to work in an office where everyone is so engaged. So as these pillars are unveiled to the public, meant to represent these 5 good people, I hope you and the generations who follow you can view them in both contexts. These were people with families, interests, and desires that were all unique and very much in line with furthering the communities that they served. I want a future where there's also a freedom for the people of the press, where humanity takes precedence. One where we see these 5 as people who fought for a greater cause, but also as individuals who are part of the greater whole that we call society. I hope that's where your feelings of empathy culminate from first. These were people who believed in what they did, but also had families who believed in them. And I ask the people who are here to think of how you can actualize your empathy in a way that caters toward the shared humanity that helped mold these 5 people into being the good people I spoke about 3 years ago and again today. Because we need to value people like Rebecca, John, Wendy, Rob, and Gerald, and do it actively, not just for their family's sake, but for our own as well. Thank you, and freedom to the people of the press.
Since that fateful day 3 years ago, there have been many mass shootings. Mass shootings have almost become normal. There was a time that mass shootings stunned people. But whether it's 20 children in Connecticut or 10 people in California, the numbness has become normal. And for a moment, people will get to the point of being pessimistic. Will America change? Is this to be the future for our children? I think not. By nature, I'm an optimistic person. And years ago, I heard a song that inspired me to bring about change. And I hope our next presenter singing this song will inspire you to bring about change. Let me welcome to the podium our own Tony Spencer.
Change. Change is. What is change going to do? Change is going to come. But if change is going to happen, it has to begin in me. How many remember the song, How Many Roads Must a Man Walk Down, right? Sam Cooke sang that song on every concert he did, nationally and internationally. But then he decided that change had to begin with him. We know it was a time of the civil rights era, and brothers had process. Sam Cooke was the first one to stop doing the process. It didn't reflect who he really was. And he sat down and wrote this song, and his friend Bobby Womack, who was his drummer, said, "Man, you sure you want to do this song?" Mary Wilson from the Supreme said, "Man, Sam, you sure?" And Sam knew that the change had begun in him. Where will the change begin with you? Change is going to come. Watch your leg, bro. I was born by the river, in a little tent. And just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been real hard living. Listen to this. But I'm not afraid to die, 'cause I still trust who's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Whoa, yes it will. I go to the movies, oh, when I go downtown. Someone said, boy, please don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know that a change is gonna come. Whoa, yes it will. Where are my change agents? So I go to my brother, and my brother says, listen to me, son, help me please. You know what? You wind up cutting me. Oh, back down on my knees. Whoa, there've been times when I thought I couldn't last for long. But now I know that I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, do you believe that? Just stand up with me right now. Do you believe that? Stand up. I know a change. I know a change will come. Yes, it will. Whoa. Yes, it will.
Our own Tony Spencer. Our next speaker really needs no introduction. He has been a member of this community. I've known him for a number of years. I've worked closely with him. His commitment to integrity and to newspapers and just being a person who wants to give the truth as he sees it. One of the things that amazed me was something that was said by Stuart Pittman. And it kind of tells you a little bit about who he is. When Stuart Pittman ran for county executive, he was not endorsed by the Capital newspaper. He won anyway. But you know, some people might have said, well, they didn't support me. But Stuart said, no, I want to support the Capital newspaper. And primarily because of Rick Hustle. Anybody who's dealt with Rick knows what a fantastic guy he was. And for me, personally, there was an article that he wrote, an editorial. I told Triff, the publisher of this newspaper, it's really for me the model across the country. He wrote it on June 20th, 2020, June 21st, 2020. And the article was about racism and how we as a nation had to come to bear with it. He started with his own newspaper. Those who've never read that editorial, you should. It should be preserved. It's an example of that change that Tony was singing that was coming. Rick Hustle has always been committed to telling the truth, being able to be a truth teller. And in America, being a truth teller is not easy. People sometimes prefer the big lie than to the truth. People rally around things they know not to be true. And it takes a real strong person, despite the opposition, despite the criticism, to do what you believe needs to be done. Please welcome to the podium the former editor of the Capital newspaper, Rick Hustle.
That's very kind of you. I was going to ask you to stand up and inform my remarks. I won't do that now. You've already done it. I'd just like to start off saying something that we all can agree with, and that, wow, am I sweaty. And I am going to have a major forehead sunburn later today. I met Carl Snowden before I moved to Annapolis, and I've mentioned this to him, and I don't know if he really remembers, but he's kind enough to say that he does. I was a reporter in my first job at a weekly newspaper in Ocean City, where I grew up. And Carl was there to advocate for, I think it was a custodial worker who wasn't getting a fair shake from City Hall. And I just was, who is this guy? You know, what's he doing here in Ocean City? He's from Annapolis. I think the next time I saw Carl, he was picketing the office of the Capitol. And so it's with a great sense of history of my former newspaper. It's still my newspaper. It's with a great sense of history that I realized that my newspaper was not always fair to the black community here. And for the last 60 years, we have worked hard to change that through a series of owners and generations of reporters and editors. And so it is with a deep sense of personal gratitude that I noticed that it was the black community that spearheaded this monument. So thank you. You'll have to bear with me. I find that I tear up a little bit more than I used to. A few of us were together at Galway Bay the other night after a reception for Paul Gillespie's wonderful Fallen Journalism exhibit at the Michael Bush Library. And we were sharing a beer or two, or three. And as happens when you're in a bar with people who are by nature storytellers and fact checkers, stories started to flow. And in my mind's eye, Rob was there too. That tall gentleman was listening and laughing the way he did. His ideas about story and writing were shared even though he never said a word. Thank you for this memorial to Rob and Gerald and Wendy and John and Rebecca. But they're not here. And as hard as the wonderful people who made this memorial worked on it, they aren't in these bricks or in these powerful words. And they're not in the price they paid for it. They're not here. The true memorial to Rob and John and Gerald and Wendy and Rebecca is in the hearts of those who loved and worked with them. It's in Maria's heart and Montana's and Andrea and Erica's. It's in the heart of brothers and sisters and sons and daughters who lost them. If you worked at the Capitol or you work at the Capitol, stand up. Not lying. I'm going to make you stand up. You are the memorial to those people. And the way you carry forward their work and their memory is what will matter. Sorry. They were flesh and blood, flawed and perfect in their own way. They were my friends, and that to me is more precious than any words or any memorial. A lot's been said about the future of the Capitol. I got a really dumb email today from somebody who said they didn't like what had happened since I left. A week. A week. And I sent back a note, and I'll tell you the same thing I told you. If you want the Capitol to survive, support it. Subscribe to it. If you're in public office, don't take the legal notices out. It's going to need a lot of support to keep going. You know, I think it was Ben Frank. You have freedom, and it's up to you to keep it. If you care about journalism and truth and freedom of the press anywhere, subscribe to your local news organization, whether it's a newspaper or a digital news service or something, because that's the only way they will survive. This is not the only memorial that will be built to Rob and Wendy and Gerald and John and Rebecca. There's one working in D.C. called the Fallen Journalist Memorial. And what happened in Annapolis was heard around the world. And it's the genesis for what will be a national memorial that will recognize journalists of all nationality over the years who have died. And you would be stunned at how many there are. I think when the museum closed in Washington, I think that the wall there had more than 2,000 names. And yet there is no national memorial to this in Washington. And I hope there will be. I know good people are working to make it happen. I hope this memorial does what its authors intended, and that is inspire people to defend the First Amendment, to defend freedom. For me, Rob's memory, his ghost, and that of Rebecca and Wendy's and John's and Gerald will be the memorial I carry for the rest of my life. It is painful. It's hard. But it's a burden I carry with honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Committee, which I chair, has had the privilege of building a number of memorials in Anne Arundel County. We built the one to Dr. King in Arnold and Anne Arundel Community College. We built another to Coretta Scott King in Edgewater, Maryland. We built the Civil Rights Foot Soldiers Memorial across from the Rundle Center. And we chose to build this one. And in all of those memorials that we've built, we've had a partner who's been with us from day one. He represented what was then a local bank. He understood the need to be a part of the community and to give back to the community. I remember once he said, Tony Spencer was singing, and Tony Spencer said, I've got a CD on sale. And the next speaker got up behind him and said, I'm in the CD business too, but I got a different kind of CD. Please bring to the podium Alan Hyatt, president of Severn Bank.
First, I'm going to exercise my prerogative of not wearing a jacket on this 120-degree stage. Hope that doesn't offend anybody, but if it does, you have to get over it, that's all. So it's you in today's crowd that are the keepers of our sacred First Amendment. Because you see, the First Amendment is not just words, it requires participation, it requires action. And you all, on a hot day like today, are here in support of the First Amendment, so please continue. Please keep that up. I'd like to also suggest that there's another critical way to perpetuate this hallmark of freedom, the First Amendment, and you've heard a little bit about it today, and that is we genuinely need a robust local newspaper. We need a local paper that reports objectively and fairly the facts of what goes on in our community. And I am fearful, and I know it's only been a week, but I am fearful that the new owner may not grasp that. So it's up to us to deliver the message to the new owner and support the paper. As Mr. Hutzel indicated, we have to support the paper in order for it to support us, so we can have the kind of journalism that's appropriate for local news. You know, we can certainly acknowledge that it's been a turbulent time in our country in recent months and years, actually. But we've always had turbulence. There's been more difficult times in our country than we've seen recently, if you look at history. And what gets us through it all is the rule of law and the ability to speak out. We have to speak out when we don't think things are correct. And when we have administrations in government, they will come and they will go, but the First Amendment must endure, and it requires all of us to be vigilant. So, Mr. Chairman Snowden, elected officials, special guests, and in particular, the family of the survivors, and Mr. Hutzel, who sure knows how to run a local newspaper, and we will miss you. When the opportunity came along to memorialize the tragic events of 3 years ago and to help tell the world that Annapolis, Maryland cares and would not forget, I had the opportunity as chairman of Severn Bank to participate, and that, you know, much like a local newspaper, that's what a local bank does that cares. It participates in events like this. And we had the opportunity to step up and did what I think was the appropriate thing to do under the circumstances. We were able to coordinate the activities here, assist on the funding, and it is certainly gratifying to see the product that resulted from everyone's efforts, because there were people that gave substantially, some gave a little because that's all they could afford to do, some gave anonymously, but there was a great deal of participation. I would just like to read a few names of individuals that did make a difference. Wayne Rogers, Dimitri Safakianudis, Maurice Tozay, Louis Bracey, Carl Snowden, Chief Joseph Johnson, just to name the individuals, and you can look at the plaque adjacent to us and see all that gave. So, again, on behalf of the committee, I thank everyone that participated. I thank all of you for showing up today, and let's celebrate the First Amendment appropriately going forward in our lives and never forget what happened 3 years ago. Thank you.
I met with Triff and Renee when we were in Baltimore. And as I said earlier in the program, it was actually Renee who came with this concept of guardians. And we met with the Baltimore Media Group and its publisher, and they were partners in helping to make this happen. They ran a number of ads in local newspaper and in the Baltimore Sun, did a number of feature stories, and it was a real partnership. And I'm hoping that that partnership can continue as we move forward to the future. Please join me in welcome to the podium Triff, the publisher, editor, and chief of the Baltimore Sun Media.
Tragedy brought so many of us together 3 years ago today in what would become one of the worst days in American journalism and certainly the worst day in the history of our news organization. We will never forget Wendy Winters, Rebecca Smith, Rob Hyacin, Gerald Fishman, and John McNamara. What they meant to the Capitol, what they meant to their colleagues, what they meant to our readers, and what each one of them, how each one of them was special in their own way to this community. On behalf of the Capital Gazette and Baltimore Sun Media, we are touched that this memorial, this incredible memorial, honors our cherished colleagues. And we'd like to extend our thanks to the state of Maryland, Anne Arundel County, the city of Annapolis, the Caucus of African American Leaders, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Committee, the private donors, and a special thanks to Carl Snowden, whose tireless efforts saw this memorial come to fruition. A heartfelt thanks also goes to the people of Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, and the surrounding area. Your outpouring of unwavering support has been a great source of strength for all of us during these past 3 years. And it has been a welcome reminder of a local newspaper's importance on the fabric of a community. 230 years ago, our forefathers acknowledged the importance of a free press by including it in the First Amendment. And it's a right that many could argue has never been more important and has never been more challenged as it has been in recent history. Now, as journalists, it's our mission to inform communities, and it's a responsibility that we all take seriously. And I remain in awe of the bravery and dedication of our many journalists who began reporting moments after the shooting. So I hope that this memorial serves as a reminder to future generations of the importance of a free and independent press. But most importantly, we'll look to this memorial as an everlasting tribute to the 5 colleagues that we'll never forget: Gerald, John, Rob, Wendy, and Rebecca. Thank you for being here today.
Our next speaker is the keynote speaker. David Simon, I talked to Simmons, and she told me that he was working on a play about Martin Luther King Jr. I instantly got interested in it. It's not a play, it's actually a TV drama based on Taylor Branch's book, something he's been working on. He's more noted for having done The Wire. He caught Baltimore City doing this HBO series. Many of the characters he featured were people I knew. Did an excellent job on that. Today he comes to deliver the keynote address. And I found the title of this address so interesting that I can't wait to hear him deliver it. The Death of Truth. Please join me and welcome to the podium, David Simon.
Thank you. If the banker gets to take off his jacket, the TV hack does too. It's hot out here, and I'm tempted to read only every other word. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor for the invitation on this occasion to address you. More than that, I'd like to thank the governor and state and county city officials for undertaking to create this memorial to 5 men and women who gave the last measure of devotion to the public's right and need to know. I'm sincerely grateful that the state of Maryland and its leadership brought us here today. Second, I now have to admit that I'm exceedingly uncomfortable thanking politicians for anything ever. Forgive me, but I was raised in newsrooms as a journalist, and I come to you as an emissary from a time when good newspapers were not pitied or mourned by the governing powers, but were considered with rueful wariness and even feared at moments by those in authority. We needed no memorials. Our prevailing monuments came off the presses daily to be unceremoniously dumped on doorsteps, whether you liked it or not. Understand what I'm saying here. It's the God-given right of every American to resent or even hate his local newspaper. Indeed, it's our birthright to hate any and every news organization, print or broadcast. You might not avail yourself of that right, or you might not invoke it consistently if you do, but it's there for you whenever life doesn't go the way you want. Your hometown newspaper will highlight your most embarrassing utterance at a PTA hearing or detail your company's bankruptcy, just as it will at some point ignore your daughter's masterful performance in the school play. It will herald some political views you abhor
and denigrate some politicians you wish to cheer. It will spell your name incorrectly when you're named Rotarian of the Year, and dox you with precision when you're cuffed and processed for driving drunk. An honest newspaper has no real friends and some fixed and certain enemies, namely those who wish to operate without the critique or attention of others. And these are the givens even in a healthy national culture, with a politically mature leadership and norms of governance that discourage the worst fascist impulses and the greatest possible violence. Today, our political culture is no longer healthy, our political leadership is no longer mature, and our norms of governance are disappearing fast with every news cycle. If you think that these things are occurring now because mainstream journalism has become less professional, more partisan, or increasingly hostile to men and women of honor, you need to read more of what once passed for newspapering in this country. The founders of the American public were not treated to a more genteel brand of newspapering than today's political leaders. Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and their ilk were all pummeled by some of the nastiest, most slanderous verbiage imaginable. But no matter, these men were made of stronger stuff than today's politicians. Jefferson, for one, famously said he would prefer a nation with newspapers and no government to that of a country with a government and no newspapers. Well, Jefferson's worst-case scenario is now staring us down. Capitalism and the solitary metric of maximized profit is devouring American newspapering, pulling cash from the nation's papers to the very moment that they'll be asked to close their doors. Wall Street analysts have demanded it, and hedge funds have delivered it. Here in Maryland, the Capital Gazette of this city and the Sun of Baltimore are brutalized by out-of-town ownership, and that answers to the hunger of shareholders, not to any public or community obligation. The newsroom where I once labored with 500 others on morning, evening, and county-zoned editions now struggles on with 70 journalists on staff. Here in Annapolis, the newsroom of the paper where people gave their lives no longer actually exists. It's been sold out from under the now threadbare staff. Meanwhile, a social media construct once heralded as a great democratization of free information, led by, quote, citizen journalists, unquote, has instead proven itself to be a playground for untethered falsehood, agitprop, and political machination. Without professional gatekeepers to assess and corroborate fact, anyone can say anything, and in fact, they do. We have all of us now lived long enough to contemplate the death of truth. And now, lastly, we come to the actual targeting of journalists. And do not dare write off what happened here in Annapolis to only the isolated rage of one unstable man. Credit also a political construct that has convinced too many Americans that an independent press is not only an unnecessary impediment to governance, but an affront to be eradicated. Yet those of us gathered here today are paying rightful homage to 5 newspaper employees martyred for simply trying to inform their community. But if you think that a great mass of other Americans are not now content to cheer the destruction of open speech or the mechanism of dissent, if you think there is still an abiding heritage of Locke or Voltaire or John Stuart Mill in this country, then reflect on the fact that a president of these United States, the personification of leadership in what is said to be the free world, preceded the carnage at the Capital Gazette by declaring that journalists who would dare to critique his policies and performance were, quote, enemies of the people, unquote, and that any and all reportage that disadvantaged him could be classified as, quote, fake news, unquote. An American president spent a year before the bloodshed in the Capital Gazette newsroom attacking a host of national media organizations by name, so many and so often that his ranting was tantamount to an attack on mainstream media as a whole, and by declaring the very product of so many institutions to be fraudulent and a great national danger. The president nurtured a culture of grievance in which an attempt to strike at that product or its creators could be elevated to the mantle of patriotism and heroism by extremists willing to do so. That the dispute by the gunman who took 5 lives here in Annapolis had been ongoing for years before the president targeted independent reporting is not suggestive of a disconnect between the recklessness of his rhetoric and the ensuing violence. Quite the opposite. The dispute in question dragged for years without accelerating into violence. Not until our national leader named a national enemy and gave thought to the unthinkable in the weakest and angriest minds of a nation saturated with firearms and devoid of responsible gun laws. enemies of the people. And yet, the dead we honor today in Annapolis are beautifully and delicately representative of what is so abiding and honorable about the simple act of going to see and learn things, coming back to a keyboard, and in a limited window of time, trying to accurately relate what we know. These dead can't be caricatured. They're not the bloated talking heads of the cable news cycle. They're not beltway-wrapped insiders traipsing into West Wing briefings with credentials and a dangle around their necks. The dead of the Capital Gazette were quiet and careful foot soldiers in a daily war to simply find out enough about what might be happening in Annapolis and Central Maryland, be it local court decisions, police blotter items, legislative coverage, school board hearings, high school and college sports, or community. And they work to maintain an advertising base so that the cost of delivering news to readers could be defrayed. I had the honor of knowing 3 of those slain. Rob Hyacin, who worked for years in the feature section of the Baltimore Sun, was a deft and delicate voice, crafting stories that delivered ordinary and extraordinary people both. His byline was always an invitation to travel to some part of my city and spend time encountering life on a scale that other reporters recognized as precisely human. He was a pro. John McNamara was a friend from days shared putting out the college newspaper, the University of Maryland Diamondback. His first love stayed sports reporting, and he was, among other duties, still covering UM athletics for the Capital Gazette when he was killed. In a newsroom of ranting undergraduates, he was the most humble and genuinely sincere creature, and I will always remember the quiet pain on John's face when the sports editor laid out too few column inches for a basketball photo, so that the choice was either editing out Buck Williams' legs in mid-jump shot or cutting 4 inches of Mac's game story. John killed his own copy before doing harm to the image of Williams, delivering from the top of the key. Gerald Fishman was a senior when I arrived at the Diamondback as a freshman, and he was one of 3 assistant editors who handed me my first story assignment and then suffered through my raw copy and made it better. Wendy Williams, a community beat reporter and special publications editor, and Rebecca Smith, who had just started work as a sales assistant at the newspaper, were just as randomly targeted by this insanity. These are the people I see when I think of an American president declaring time and again for the villainy of journalists, or when I note the silence and complicity of his political allies in that kind of rhetoric. Yes, this memorial to the slain in Annapolis is an essential response to that cynicism, and I really am grateful for it. But my time in newsrooms leaves me no gift for optimism. We're gathered here 3 years later, and I am no less fearful for the future. Because more than an unfit president, or the silence of his allies, or the rank partisanship that has devoured our governing ethics, I'm worried about us, about we the people, the citizens of the Republic. Annapolis was a harbinger, a terrible warning. But now, 3 years later, who are we still? What are we thinking? How do we govern a society when our media culture is collapsing? When Americans no longer entitle themselves to different opinions, which is our nature and birthright, but to different facts entirely, a world where truth has died? What do we think is coming when many of us cheer the idea that a free press is their biggest enemy? What do they think when a gunman marches into an American newsroom? What do they win? Federal judgeships? Cash back on their taxes? More racial privilege? A new burst of freedom? This is now on us, and it's up to us to remember exactly what happened here and why. Thank you very much.
All right, we're almost at that point. First, give yourselves a round of applause. You've been just a fantastic organization. There are 2 last things to do to formally bring this to a close. Juanita Cage, would you come forward, please? Juanita Cage Lewis, who originally thought of this. Daryl Jones, D. Goodwin, please come forward. And the mayor and the county executive, if they will stand. As I had indicated earlier, it's our job to help raise money, raise consciousness, sometimes raise hell, to get people to understand the importance of something. But what we do when we do these particular memorials, each time we give it a gift. In this case, it's going to be a gift to the city of Annapolis. After some very brief remarks from Darrell Jones, we're going to be actually asking all the people on the stage to please go down to this ribbon. We're going to do the official ribbon cutting and then invite all of you to please come and look at the memorial if you've not done so. And for the Martin Luther King Jr. Committee, we'll be meeting with the county executive right afterwards. We'll do some photographs and that sort of thing, as well as the members of the Caucus of African American Leaders. Please bear with us. Darrell Jones, as I said, served as a legal counsel for us and has put together the document that will be necessary to turn this over to the city of Annapolis. And we put together a ceremonial proclamation that is signed by all three of them, but will be read by Darrell. Darrell?
Thank you, Carl. Thank you to the Caucus of African American Leaders, as well as to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dinner Committee, City of Annapolis, Anne Arundel County and State of Maryland. The City of Annapolis proclamation reads, whereas the citizens of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and the nonprofit community-based Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Committee, Incorporated, and the Caucus of African American Leaders endeavored to preserve and protect the First Amendment, and whereas citizens in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County wanted to remember Rebecca Smith, Wendy Winters, Rob Hyacinth, Gerald Fleshman, and John McNamara, who were guardians of the First Amendment. And whereas great effort has gone into creating a memorial to preserving their contribution to our city, county, state, and nation. And whereas the cooperation between the citizens, local and state governments, and the aforementioned local organizations have resulted in the creation of the guardians of the First Amendment and the undeniable dedication of its people have resulted in this project. And whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Committee, Incorporated, wishes to gift to the city of Annapolis the guardians of the First Amendment Memorial, now therefore, Mayor Gavin Buckley, County Executive Stuart Pittman, and Attorney Darrell Jones affix their signatures to this document to gift this memorial to the citizens of Annapolis, the guardians of the First Amendment Memorial.
Now, if the members on the stage will go right down before we cut the ribbon. Stuart, you want to lead the way? Right there. They got them. Please come down and get one of those things. Phil, would you? John, please. One last comment before they officially cut the ribbon. It's something that Rick had said in his remarks, and I just want to end with this. 3 years ago, when we went before the Caucus of African American Leaders to propose that this memorial be done, a woman who happened to be white came to the meeting and she walked up to us and she asked this question: why would this black organization, she referred to us as, be interested in doing a memorial to the journalists? She made the point that none of them were black. Our response was very simple. We want to do this memorial because they were our friends. That's all. It had nothing to do with race. Wendy was a remarkable woman. And when I look at the midshipman that was here, I remember all the stories she did on the midshipman and just young people. So with no further ado, would you join me in counting to 3? And at 3, they will cut the ribbon and the program will come officially over. Shall we begin? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. It is now the official property of the City of Annapolis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. County Executive.